So we're going to go ahead and move on to our next speaker. Dr. Dan White joined the University of Alaska Fairbanks 20 years ago as a professor of civil and environmental engineering. He did a lot of very innovative and very important work related to freshwater resources on the North Slope during that time period. Certainly set himself apart as one of the strongest researchers in the Institute of Northern Engineering, and as a result was appointed the director of the Institute of Northern Engineering at the University of Alaska Fairbanks in 2006. One of the initiatives he started as director was to develop the Alaska Center for Energy and Power. And I was fortunate enough that Dan hired me to direct that program in 2008. And I have to say, of all the people that I have worked with and for over the years, I think I've learned more about leadership from Dan than anybody else. So I'm really pleased to have him as one of our speakers here this evening. He also took on later a role as Vice Chancellor, Associate Vice Chancellor, and managed the Office of Intellectual Property and Commercialization at the University of Alaska Fairbanks through that. And I think that that's really where, that certainly fed into his interest in innovation and technology commercialization, and I think that's going to be what he's going to be touching on tonight. He's now recently been appointed the Vice President for Academic Affairs and Research at the University of Alaska under President Johnson. So please give a big welcome to Dan White.
Thank you. Innovation leads to better products and better lives. And my life is better because of innovations in energy, clean water, transportation, and medicine. I had the pleasure of directing the Intellectual Property Office at the University of Alaska Fairbanks for 5 years. And during that 5 years, 233 people walked in the door and said, I have an invention, a new innovation, something that they've done to make their jobs better, to make them more efficient, or to make them more effective. In most cases, these innovations were not the product of the research. It wasn't the end. In most cases, I'm probably too close to that. It was mostly the means to the end. It was people innovating along the way. And a good example of this is Jack Chen, who's shown there. Dr. Chen studies viruses, and he works in the state virology lab. Whenever there's an outbreak of disease, the bird flu samples, for example, if there's rabies, those blood samples get sent to Dr. Chen, and his job is to look at the blood and find out what are the pathogens that are in this blood. He has techniques. There are techniques that have been developed around the world, but he developed a new one that made his job faster and better and more effective. And that technology for finding the little bits of virus, that's a really important discovery. He can find these little bits of DNA in blood better than anyone in the world. And the technology that he's developed just to make his job better is going to be used in clinics everywhere. To learn where to point this. Can you go to the next slide, please, Marcia? I have heard that basic science does not pay in the short term, that you have to wait decades before you get your return on investment. On the contrary, I would say that basic science pays off every day in the form of innovations. Cancer research is a great example. We're going to spend $4.8 billion this year studying cancer, trying to find the cure to cancer. Are we going to find the cure to cancer this year? Probably not. But I bet you that we're going to find hundreds of innovations that improve the way we treat it, the way we find it, the way we detect it, and the way we remove it. That is important research towards the grand challenge of curing cancer. Kelly Drew, can you go back, please? Kelly Drew is a scientist at the University of Alaska who studies hibernation in ground squirrels. She's trying to, yeah, it doesn't look too bad, does it? It must be pretty good. She studies the physiology, the brain, kind of the way the body behaves during hibernation. And that research has led to our understanding of cooling the human body to reduce the negative impacts of traumatic injury. If the human body is cooled shortly after a traumatic injury, the brain stops the triage, trying to put everything back together, and the body heals better and faster. One of the problems, though, is that we, as warm-blooded mammals at 98.6, we start to shiver. We go into hypothermia and cardiac arrest. Based on Dr. Drew's understanding of ground squirrels, she's developed therapeutic drugs that prevent that from happening so that we can gain all of the benefits from this body cooling during following traumatic injury. Go ahead to the next slide, please, Marcia. But you can't just stop at innovation. Thomas Edison, this is the sign for the Office of Intellectual Property and Commercialization, and we use the light bulb. The light bulb is the universal symbol for invention, for innovation, for great ideas. But Thomas Edison, who holds the patent for the light bulb, Thomas Edison was not the first person to put electric current through a filament to produce light. In fact, that was done nearly 100 years before Thomas Edison got the patent on the light bulb. What did Thomas Edison do different? He put it in a light bulb and he packaged it to a product that could be sold and commercialized. And that's what lit the world. Researchers at the University of Alaska Fairbanks are getting this. Go ahead, Marcia. This is Jeff Rothman. Jeff Rothman works at the Geophysical Institute at the University of Alaska Fairbanks. And he is holding in his hand a little infrasound microphone. And this microphone hears sounds at very low frequencies. When there was an asteroid a couple years ago that hit Russia, that sound traveled across the Bering Sea, and Jeff heard it in that little microphone. And the next day, he heard that sound again, but this time that sound had traveled all the way around across Europe, across the Atlantic Ocean, across Canada, and Jeff heard that sound with this little microphone. But he didn't stop there with that innovation. Now, Jeff has a company, Unique Wire Sensor Systems, for commercializing that microphone. He's taken it from an innovation to a product to a company. Go ahead to the next slide, please, Marcia. And you're going to hear a little bit later from Dr. Peter Webley. Dr. Webley and Dr. Dean, on the other side of that check, are pioneers in this. They were the first two to have a company producing and selling the products from their research at the University of Alaska Fairbanks. And what they developed is a better way of detecting ash plumes from volcanoes. Volcanoes erupt, that ash goes out into the atmosphere, and they have to figure out where that's going to go. And if they'd had that technology in Iceland, they wouldn't necessarily have had to close the whole airspace, saving hundreds of millions of dollars in interrupted commercial traffic. So this comes full circle. So what happens, what that check shows, is their company developing, commercializing their innovation, has taken that, they make money, that money goes back to the university, that money goes back to all of the inventors that are shown here, and they continue innovating. So this is a success story, and this is something we're going to see a lot more coming out of the University of Alaska Fairbanks as these innovations get commercialized into companies. And this is, in many cases, the products of basic science. And so what I would argue is that basic science, and you'll hear basic science is research for the sake of research. I'll tell you that I found research, this basic science is research for the sake of innovation. Thank you.